right, welcome everybody. Good morning. We're going to let people trickle in, but we are starting on time. So, my name is Andrea Aldana. I'm the Director of Housing Advocacy at the Community Development Partnership, and this is the Lower Cape Housing Institute. Today's workshop is on community by design, and it was developed in collaboration with Massachusetts Housing Partnership and some wonderful speakers who Laura Schufelt from MHP will be introducing you to shortly. A couple housekeeping things. This workshop is being recorded. Um, this past fiscal year, I believe since the fall, we started posting all of our recorded workshops to our YouTube channel. So this recording will be available on YouTube, let's say by Monday, possibly sooner. So please make sure that you share that link, which we'll also be sharing with anyone who was not able to make it today. And you can refer back to the workshop at any time through our YouTube channel. If you're not familiar, the Community Development Partnership is your local CDC here on the Lower Cape. We help the Lower Cape live, work, and thrive. And we've been running the Housing Institute since 2017. You've all been muted upon entry. So when you're ready to ask questions, we will ask you to unmute yourself. And the process to ask questions is that we ask that you please hold your questions until the end of each speaker's presentation. We would prefer that you ask questions by raising your hand using the Zoom raise your hand feature. If you're not familiar with that feature, you can post your question in the chat. That's the easiest way for us to manage fielding questions. And I'm joined today by my colleague, Palinda Deegan, who will be helping me manage the chat later on. And so today's workshop, Community by Design, was developed with a couple things in mind. One is we really want to reframe the conversation around density to focus more on design. We still see a common question that comes up whenever we're talking about a particular site or development, or someone will say, invariably someone will ask, so how many units do you want on that site? And we just don't think that that's the right question. Our answer is almost always going to be, you ought to be maximizing the housing potential of your site. So it's not a question of how many units, but when people have an aversion to a particular number, when you really dig down deep, the real issue is what it looks like. And what it looks like is not the same question as how many units are on the site. So we really want to help you kind of think outside the box, think more creatively by looking at examples locally and nationally of developments that are dense and are beautiful. We think that you can do both, and we really want to encourage the region to be thinking that way, particularly in this moment where we have 4 really interesting opportunities across the Lower Cape with the Walsh property in Truro, Tea Time in Eastham, Governor Prince in Orleans, and Sea Camps in Brewster, where we have not only an opportunity to add some absolutely critically needed housing, but to do it in a way that is contextual in terms of the architecture and really supports the resiliency of our community, where we're thinking about building neighborhoods and not just homes, and really helping the year-round community thrive by connecting people to amenities and just thinking holistically about site development and housing development overall. So with that, I will turn it over to Laura Schufelt to kick us off today. And if you have any technical questions, you can put them in the chat and we'll reach out to you individually.
Thanks, Andrea. Good morning, everyone. As Andrea said, I'm Laura Schufelt. I'm the Director of Community Assistance at Mass Housing Partnership, MHP. We are a quasi-state agency that promotes and assists communities to develop affordable housing across the state. Our main business is financing affordable rental housing. We also have the most affordable first-time homebuyer program, the One Mortgage. We have, starting recently and not quite rolled out fully, the Homeowner Assistance Fund, which is Mass HAF, HAF, because we always, shorten these things so you all know what we're talking about. And that's a assistance fund for homeowners who have fallen behind on their mortgage, and it's through federal funds. So if you look at mhp.net, you can find details of that program to prevent foreclosures across the state. And we also have the Center for Housing Data, which compiles and analyzes housing data to assist in policymaking across the state. So that's who I am and who I'm from, where I'm from. I'm also a native Cape Codder and still live here. So I've been assisting the CDP in these community Cape housing institutes since the inception, and really proud to be here again today. Our first speaker today is Sharon Rooney. Many of you know Sharon from her time at the Cape Cod Commission. She's now the principal planner for Tide Bond. And without further ado, I'll ask Sharon to say hello.
Well, good morning, everyone. And as Laura said, I'm now principal planner with Tide Bond out of our Pocasset office in Bourne. Yes, I did work for the Cape Cod Commission for a number of years, retired in 2019 as the chief planner. And what I'm going to be talking about this morning is going to cover some of that work towards the end of my time there, focused on Cape Cod place types, which is a really central component of the 2018 regional policy plan. And then talk about some considerations community-wide on environmental concerns that should be addressed when we're looking at sites for housing. And then close up with an example of some work that I did in Falmouth. It was really kind of looking at this sort of community approach towards an area that is densely developed for commercial today, but is looking at providing more mixed use development in the future, and that's in Davis Straits in Falmouth. So with that, I'm going to get my slideshow going here, hopefully. Can everyone see that? Hopefully.
No.
No? How about this? Can you see that?
No.
Oh boy.
There we go.
You got it? Okay,
yep.
Very good. Sorry about that. Took me a second here. And let me just change the. All right, still good? All right, very good. So yeah, again, thank you very much for having me this morning. As I said, I'm going to be talking, I'm going to start by talking a little bit about the Cape Cod place types. This is a very, if you will, high level concept that was adopted in the 2018 regional policy plan. So this is the plan that guides both development and planning for the Cape Cod region. And the Cape Cod Commission adopted this framework for planning and regulation that recognizes that the Cape isn't one size fits all, not every place is the same, and every town is not the same, but yet we all know that there are distinct areas that do have similar built and natural characteristics. And so they termed this Cape Cod place types. And I'm going to cover a few of these areas and some of the principles that guide or could guide development of housing and resource protection, depending on where you're located. So this first one, I'm going to cover out of the 7 place types or 8 place types. The first one, not surprisingly on the Cape, we have diverse natural resources here. And the natural areas, the concept or the principle here is to minimize adverse development impacts to these sensitive resource areas, and also to preserve lands that define the Cape's natural characters. So areas such as dunes and woodlands, these are all very important areas. Yes, is there?
Sorry to interrupt. You're not in slideshow?
I'm sorry. Okay. So.
At the top. Can you see it? At the top where it has file home, going across, it has slideshow.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I thought I was in that mode, but I'm not.
You got it there. It's just shifting it. You
I don't want to do it for some reason.
got it?
Sharon, at the very top where it says autosave, there's an icon toward the end that looks kind of like an easel. If you click that, I think that'll put you straight into slideshow.
You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to stop here and redo this. So hang on one second. I apologize.
Sure.
What are you seeing now? Yeah.
Same thing as before. We see your
No, I think-
presentation, we just need it in the bigger.
Yeah, it doesn't seem to want to switch to. That's the best I can do.
Okay, let's keep going.
All right,
Thank
sorry
you.
about that. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Sharon, if you just minimize the slides, if you can slide that over, it'll make your slide, the main slide bigger. That might help too.
Does that work?
No, sorry, that didn't.
Oh my goodness. Well, I apologize. I'm going to have to go with what's working here, and you can at least see the slides. Okay. All right, let's proceed ahead, and I apologize for any sort of awkwardness here. I was talking about natural areas. So this is sort of the least developed areas of Cape Cod. And these are areas where we should be looking to preserve lands that define Cape Cod's character and contribute to the scenic character, and to improve the Cape's resilience to severe storms and climate change. The next area of these place types are rural development areas, and these are areas that where the goal here is to, if development is located in these areas, that it's sited and scaled to avoid impacts on both scenic or cultural resources. And the goal is also to cluster development to protect areas that might be used for agriculture, but also that provide us, the natural and rural landscape that Cape Cod is known for. Historic areas are the third type that I'm going to describe, and not surprisingly here, these are areas that are rich with our region's historic values and resources. And the goal here in these areas is to support infill development. This is where development might be sited and scaled, and should be sited and scaled to respect the character and the function of historic areas, and where you should look to encourage the reuse of historic structures, if possible. And then the fourth area, kind of going from the least developed to the most developed in concept, are activity centers. And these are areas that can really vary in size and scale on the Cape. But there are areas where we envision a more mixed use and multifamily residential development, such as like downtown Orleans, Orleans Center. And the town has been taking some steps to move in that direction by providing some incentives for mixed use and residential development over commercial development, for example. But these are also areas that might also have historic buildings. And so we want to protect those historic resources at the same time. So the scale of activity-centered development should be at a size and type that's really appropriate and desired by the community through their local comprehensive plan or other local planning processes. And also, these are areas where it's envisioned that they are served by adequate infrastructure. And I'll get into that a little bit more in a moment, whether that be wastewater infrastructure, transportation, or other infrastructure that's needed to provide a greater density, a greater mix of uses, and so forth. So, but you know, the sort of the location of development is one aspect and one really key aspect. But another really important consideration as we look at providing housing and other uses on the Cape, are the environmental considerations. The Cape is a very sensitive location and region because of the resources. This is what we value and treasure, but it's also a key consideration in looking at planning for housing development. And the first that I'm going to touch on are water resources. And these include things like our groundwater resources. So most of you probably know that Cape is a sole source aquifer. So we rely on our groundwater for all of our drinking water, but it's also where all of our waste goes as well. So the Cape has very few sewered areas. This map on the right shows in black the very few sewered areas. And some of those are changing. As the towns address some of the nitrogen issues that we have in our marine embayments. So that's another area that's of critical concern. And then providing is there adequate water supply to serve development? Some areas on the Cape, and particularly the Lower Cape, are very constrained in terms of having town water. And definitely very few areas have town sewer. So these are all considerations that are really important in thinking about and planning for development. The next area I'll touch on is natural resources. As I mentioned earlier, we have many natural areas on the Cape, areas that have significant habitat, areas of rare and endangered species. We also have numerous wetlands. We have, I think, almost 1,000 ponds and lakes on the Cape. These all have buffer areas that need to be protected. And so these are all really important considerations that should go into the planning and siting of development. And not least is also topography. You think of the Cape as being flat, and as a region, it is relatively little topography change, but there are some areas, and especially in the Lower and Outer Cape, there's more significant topography that should be part of the site planning for development, because steep slopes also erode very quickly, and it really can destroy the habitat that might be on a site. So careful planning is really necessary in thinking about where development is located on a site with regard to topography as well. And then thinking about our resiliency for planning for housing, we don't want to be putting housing in harm's way in terms of both current and future coastal storm events and sea level rise. So as you know, we've experienced a lot of storms on the Cape. A lot of them happen in the wintertime, which is maybe not when people typically think of storms, but our roads, our infrastructure is very vulnerable to severe storms and nor'easters. Also, sea level rise and climate change is affecting areas that might be suitable for development in the future. There are some really good models out there that are being developed on the statewide level It's a coastal flood risk model that is being developed through MassDOT, Department of Transportation. And it's going to be a really valuable tool for Massachusetts communities in modeling future climate considerations for things like development and looking at where not only what are flooded areas today or areas that might be susceptible to flooding, but what areas might be susceptible in the future. So there's some really good and powerful tools that are being developed that can guide communities in thinking about climate and storm events in the planning for housing. And then the one of the last areas I'm going to touch on for siting of development is both access to transportation. Does the site have access to bus service? On the Cape, we don't have, a lot of different modes of transportation to offer, but bike and bus, pedestrian access, are those available and accessible to the site? And then does the site itself have good access, or is that going to be a real challenge to locating development? These are some things that that we should be thinking about when looking at siting for housing. And then finally, on the sort of the environmental side, I'm just going to talk really briefly on permitting, because all of the above issues, all of the environmental considerations, will play a role in the permitting for a project. So that'll be permitting not only on the local level, potentially regional level through the Cape Cod Commission, the state environmental review, and other permits that might be required. And local zoning, whether the zoning currently allows the project that you're considering, or will zoning changes be needed in order to allow the development to go forward. Those are all really important factors not to be overlooked in sort of thinking about future planning for housing. And then finally, I think it's really important that whether the project will have community support, whether it's going to be an uphill battle or whether there's good support for the type of housing, the density of housing, all of those factors come into play when thinking about housing and development. And then finally, I'm just going to show a very few slides here about a project that I worked on in Falmouth while I was at the Cape Cod Commission, where it was a community planning exercise. It was a planning study for the Davis Straits area. Some of you may be familiar with it. It's on Route 28 in Falmouth. So it's a heavily traveled commercial corridor and a lot of commercial uses that exist today. But the town really wanted to look at providing a sort of a different identity for this area and changing this in the future to allow more mixed use. And this is one of those activity centers, if you will, where the town desired a mix of uses, including commercial that was affordable for people, but also an affordable mix of residential and commercial and other services. And that the roadways, because it's a heavily traveled corridor, provide safety and bicycle and pedestrian access. Just a couple of images here. It's also, this area is interestingly has flood zones. So I was talking about climate earlier. Area that already today is susceptible to flooding, and the town, thinking forward, smartly wanted to consider, well, really how much development, or should development be proposed in these areas, or should we look at another way of approaching this? And we also looked at the zoning of the area, and it was a very full-scale study on a number of different issues. But just, real quickly here, we came up with some concepts for two of the areas, and it incorporated thinking about the future flood zones and kind of allowing more green space and sort of area that would be undeveloped or protected for both flood storage and for green space, as well as identifying some areas for appropriately scaled commercial and residential mixed use development. So this was, again, a high-level planning study that the town requested the commission complete, but was very, very well received by the community. And hopefully in the future, they may be looking at some zoning changes to allow sort of more of this mixed-use type development to go forward in this area. And I apologize for the formatting of my slides today, but I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Sharon. I haven't seen any raised hands. Does anyone want to unmute themselves and ask a question? If not, we will move on. I don't see anything. Thank you, Sharon.
Okay.
Next up, we have Gail Sullivan, who is an architect at G, and now I'm missing the name of the G
Don't
Studio.
worry. Studio G Architects.
Studio G.
Very
Oh,
sorry.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I don't have it in front of me. Gail, why don't you introduce yourself and we'll keep moving.
Great. Thank you. Sharon, that's great. I love the big picture context that you set for us. Thank you. I'm Gail Sullivan, and I'm the managing principal of Studio G Architects. And also presenting today is Annalise Bateson, who heads our housing studio. So we're going to do a tandem presentation, and I'm going to share my screen now, I hope. And here we go. Okay, can everybody see that? I hope.
Yes.
Great,
we can see
thanks, Andrea. So Studio G is a woman-owned firm. We're celebrating our 29th anniversary this year. We're a mission-driven design firm, so we work primarily with public and nonprofit clients to serve local communities around the Commonwealth. We're a diverse team of 20 people, and we design affordable housing, but also a lot of other projects like early learning and community centers, schools, and higher education. So you can probably see a theme. It's kind of about whatever serves the public good for us. That's what's important. So we're really happy to be here today and talk a little about affordable housing on the Cape, a subject I'm passionate about. So with a focus on community by design, and I love that terminology, what I wanted to focus on is a few subjects. It requires thoughtful programming and design at multiple scales. And Sharon was talking about one scale. So at the site planning scale, for sure, but also in the building form and the relationship between buildings, and in the amenities that we provide, amenities, services, resources, whether within the development or near the development. And also, really importantly, as Sharon was talking about, the integration of buildings and landscape for many, many reasons. So Annalise and I are going to address these today, also talk a little bit at the end about sustainable development and design for health and wellness, which we think is also critical to community, certainly to healthy communities. So sustainability and community building, we think, starts with the site design, how we approach that site. To the degree possible, we try to focus on building on already disturbed land and design to preserve the open space for all the reasons that Sharon was talking about, and for another, because we all enjoy that open space. And if anything, if we've learned anything in the last 2 years, it's the extraordinary value of getting out in nature. So how do we minimize the development area, limit tree clearing, preserve that open space for nature and for use, but also design for density because we have such an enormous need for housing? So this is an example from one of our projects, 95 Lawrence Road in Wellfleet. And here we were very much concerned with topography, and I was really glad to hear Sharon talk about that. So this site, if you can see my little marker, this site falls steeply down in this direction. And we said, okay, we're staying away from that. right? We really want to preserve that land. It's also what went closest to the most abutting neighbors. So there's already disturbed area here along Long Pond Road. There was disturbed area at the front of the Lawrence Road access here near the ball field. So why not focus the development in those areas and see if we can preserve about half of the site? So those were kind of the principles at operation. And what it took to do that is clustering multi-unit clustered buildings, putting them fairly close together, but with landscaping between. We scattered parking very deliberately. It looks casual, but it was very deliberate to have no large area of asphalt from an environmental point of view. And then we put an elevator building here along Long Pond Road, where there's an old building. It's an old classroom building related to the elementary school, which is right here. Wrapping it around the ball field. So this gives us a lot of preserved land, both at the edge and down slope, minimizing the development area, but also designing here, and I'll come back to this later, for passive solar orientation. And in this way, we were able to hold on to 50% of the open space of the 6-acre site. Why are we not advancing? I'm sorry. Give me a sec. There we go. Okay, so this shows you an aerial view there. And the other thing I wanted to mention that I think is very important that Sharon also touched on is we're trying to build community here at 2 levels. Community within a development, but also community with the rest of the community, right? How does this small neighborhood, or maybe not so small neighborhood, fit into the larger community? And so here, one of the great values, of course, is the adjacency of this new development to an elementary school, Wellfleet's only, and to the recreational space of the ball field. This is, of course, an opportunity given by the fact of the site, but in thinking about where to site new affordable housing, a great consideration. And this is not our project, but it demonstrates a different approach that we think is also very interesting. And what you see here, can you see my cursor? So I don't have to draw, yeah, great.
Yes.
Okay. So you see here is 2-story townhouses kind of around the edges of this site and an elevator building in the middle. So the elevator building, of course, is going to give the most density, right? 3 stories. It's a pretty substantial building. But out of consideration of their neighbors, because you can see there are a lot of neighbors around here, the smaller scale stuff is all around the edges. This is a great way to think about a site so that you can get that density at the center and have the muscle of the development start to get a little smaller as it goes out to its neighborhood. The other thing I wanted to point out that I think is really important, variety in building form and massing. So a couple of things. You can see here the way that buildings are clustered, these very steep, in this case, a sawtooth, of shed roofs. Here, those steep shed roofs are treated in a very different way here as well. And then a different kind of building type altogether with the low shed roof. This kind of variety in massing and design then makes it feel more like a neighborhood that's been there for a while, not all cookie cutter buildings. I think it's very, very important. So we're working right now on this. Let me see if I can write it out, maybe get it out of the way. On an 8-acre site in, actually I won't say where. It's an urban area, so it's not an area like the Lower Cape really. But what's significant about it, I think, is that it's operating on some of the same principles that we would talk about. So for siting, how you site the building, we want to encourage community among residents, but we also want to ensure privacy for each of those dwelling units to the degree that we can. Everybody wants their own privacy. In the building form, creating identity of each dwelling, that sense of arriving home. Also, designing for daylight and ventilation is really critical. And then an integrated landscape, views from the interior into the landscape. Some, what we'll call, this is 1970s rhetoric about housing, defensible outdoor space per unit, right? So the notion that every unit might have a patio or a backyard, their own space, that then bleeds into common landscape with resources that everybody can use. And here, an example, we think that one of the great examples for you all to be thinking about are some of the more rural co-housing communities. And this is one example of that. The right-hand site plan is in Amherst, it's Pioneer Valley. Co-housing, top left image is the same development. So a couple of things I'll note about it, not our work, we've attributed all the work to their architects. But notice in the site plan on the right, how the houses are somewhat, they look very informally sited. Again, this is very much thought through, but it looks very casual. Things are not set up in a straight line on a straight road, right? They've deliberately located the parking at the edges, right? Making this more of a pedestrian zone. And you can see both here in the site plan, but also here in the photograph, there is a road, right? There's a place that you can use to drive up to your dwelling to deliver, bring groceries or have anything delivered. Emergency vehicles can use, but it's more of a pedestrian feel. And I love this image because it reminds me of something that's very common on the Cape, which is the pedestrians and vehicles share the road, right? Sidewalks are not all that common in much of the Lower Cape. And so how do you make that work so that it is safe and friendly for pedestrians? And this shows you an approach to density here. These houses are pretty close together. In some cases, and you see it here in the Mosaic Commons, you can definitely see multiple dwellings in a single building. So again, promoting density, but in this case at a 2 to 2.5 story scale. Everybody's got some kind of different front porch, an entry area, and a small front yard. They are small and it is tight together. So this is one way of building density. And then just to talk about a few of the building elements that make up, that contribute to community and to a holistic approach to building massive, stepping the building volume in and out to express the individual dwellings. So this one steps back, this one steps forward, having a porch, a usable porch, right? Enough space for a chair or two, or some flower pots, something that is an expression of the individual residents to their community. Having some definition of separate front yards, and hopefully they are personalizable by the tenants, is very important. A variety of window arrangements, again, not cookie cutter, not same as we go down the line, right? So some corner windows that seem a little more informally placed, not rigidly placed, some of them grouped, some of them individual. A variety of roof lines, a variety of entry doors, using color to create variety, using different kinds of cladding, different directions of cladding, different dimensions of cladding is a way to express difference and keep things very common in the construction. The most important thing for affordable housing is how to figure out how to get all that variety while not having it cost a lot. So you want a systematic approach to this. And then one of the things that we hear a lot about on the Cape is the importance of being true to the Cape Cod vernacular. And I love the Cape Cod vernacular. I think most of us do. This is in my Payne Hollow neighborhood in Wellfleet. And it's a great example of kind of the simplest of Cape Cod buildings, a small house, gable roofed, a fair number of windows actually, for a period of time in which people saw nature as a little bit more the thing to be protected against. And then on the left-hand side, a little bit more grandeur and an additive building, which is also very, very common for the older buildings. So these are terrific. And I wanted to mention that one of the things, this quote is about the WPA guide focusing on simplicity on Cape Cod houses. They actually wanted to use Cape Cod houses in the 1930s as a model for affordable housing across the country, which I think is a great piece of history for Cape Cod folks to know. But there's another piece of Cape Cod history, right? Especially on the Lower Cape, which is the mid-century, mid-20th century. Keep forgetting we're in a different century, mid-20th century modern houses and what they brought. And they borrowed a lot from that simplicity of the Cape Cod vernacular, but they brought with it industrial materials. And I think a very different idea of how they wanted to live their lives, right? Much more about inside and outside integrated together, right? The extension of decks and porches and views to the landscape around, right? We're not protecting ourselves against nature so much as we are embracing our access to nature with these kinds of houses. And so that kind of innovation continues today. And we're going to show you some very different styles. I don't like the word so much, but styles of housing that can all accomplish the same goals. So this is a project we worked on with Arrow Street, a Cambridge-based firm. It's actually short-term residential. It's located in the historic district in Nantucket, which drove a lot around how it looked. But the significant thing for this conversation, I think, is it's a very traditional look. 2.5 stories, 2 to 2.5 stories. As you see, lots of gable roofs, lots of dormers, right? Definitely referencing the historic character, but very dense, as you see, and focused again on pedestrian access, a lovely landscape, tying all these buildings together, but also creating some separation between the units. The focus on individual doorways again, on porches, right? Extending out into the landscape. So this is a lot of housing in a relatively small area, but in a very traditional look, style. And then this is all credit to Community Housing Resource. I love their work and I've studied a fair amount of it. I think it's very thoughtful. And I call this kind of transitional in style, heavily based on the vernacular of Cape Cod, right? A lot of shingle style, gable roofs, dormers, yes, but shed dormers, also pretty traditional, gable dormers here. But then there's always a little modern twist, like this reference at Stable Path to the barn door here, right, in this door assembly, or this approach to a roof covering over the entries, right? It's a very modern approach put on the building. So it's an interesting mix of elements to create a lovely community in each of these cases. And again, and I keep coming back to, I'm not a landscape architect, but I keep coming back to landscape as an important element that ties all of this together and really makes a community, right? Central landscaped area on this side, or the small front yards facing each other on this one. And then here, a much more modern take. And Annalise is going to take over here.
Thank you, Gail. It's such a pleasure to be with you all. So thank you for the opportunity. So here we show some images of Grow Community, not our project, but we thought that was a very interesting example to show you all. So these images, they show a modern approach where the traditional and the modern elements were combined, making the design very rich and very diverse. You can observe the change in materials, the use of natural elements, so important to us all. And those elements that bring us back home and makes us feel home, makes us feel warm in cold days. And all the diversity on openings that were placed to identify and bring its own and unique identity to each one of these units. So important. Again, we want to feel home and we want to know where our house is. We don't want to be lost in the midst of a lot of same houses. Gail, can you jump one more? So similarly, our proposed design for Wellfleet took a modern approach. Each villa has its own front and is different from one another. The push and pull of the massing elements created individual yards and walks. We love the outdoors, so we made sure that we integrated them into the design. Siding, changing directions, colors, they all bring movement to the development. And that's all things that Gail pointed out that are very important for customization on the design. Next, Gail. So up to now, we have been showing single units with front doors and street presence. However, great strategy when designing communities is the placement of the elevator buildings. When sites are very tight or there is great interest to preserve the site, as an example we had shown in Wellfleet, the elevator building is a great approach. When well designed, it can relate to the smaller scale buildings, as we just showed, or can help building, and it can help build communities as well. So next. This is a good example that we are seeing here of a building that combines several elements, avoiding the repetition and promoting dynamic facade. It's fun to watch, it's not boring. It's a long building, as you can see, but the colors, the materials, the openings, the scale, they all complement each other and they make this feel home, feel transparent, and feel very welcoming. And good, and it's such a good solution for communities and not imposing, because the landscape and the design are integrated here. Next, Gail. So this is our one shot of our proposed design for Wellfleet, and this is the elevator building located on the lower portion of the site. And some of the reasons why we decided to introduce the elevator building on the develop was because we wanted to preserve the site, as mentioned before. We wanted to engage the nature and let the nature be and create a buffer around the site. So less site disturbance was achieved with an elevator building that can host, this one, for example, hosts 22 units and 24 units, sorry. And it's located and it's compact. It's accessible to all, has a tighter envelope, and tighter envelope on the design is awesome when you are trying to achieve passive housing standards. And the amenities, this building can host amenities, and it does. So it has amenities in the first floor, which is it's very accessible to this community. Next, Gail.
I hit it, but.
No worries.
There.
This is just another shot from the same building. And just to show you, when we design, especially in elevator buildings, we design from all angles, especially from the perspective of the pedestrian. A lot of people react really strongly towards elevator buildings, and they are afraid that they are imposing and they can be monolithic. So a lot of our work is to reduce the perception of height. We don't cheat, which we play with materials, we play with roofs, we play with openings, and we try to make these buildings as welcoming as they can be, with variations that will make pedestrians feel comfortable. And of course, the landscape, again, an integrated landscape. We cannot say enough. It's key to make that all work well. So next one. So we're going to talk a little bit about community spaces, so important. We strongly believe that the design should celebrate the outdoor and engage residents, creating the desired community. Community spaces can be within an elevator building, but also can be detached. Fitness centers, landscape outdoors, pools, community gardens, playgrounds are all great examples of community spaces. Our Wellfleet detached community building, as you can see on the image, will host a community and a laundry room. And it will face great outdoors with community garden and playground. We combine uses within the same building because we believe it's way more efficient. You are doing your laundry while your kid is playing the outdoors. You are enjoying the outdoors while your mom, your dad is gardening. So combining uses also promote more use for these places, because some have arguments that community buildings are not used. So that's our strategy, to really make people use them and enjoy them. Gail, the next one. So a little bit more urban now. So shared spaces where people can meet are very important. As we face the health pandemic with COVID, and I'm sorry talking about COVID, I know we are all tired about it, but the shared spaces require even more attention. These spaces should be vibrant and open and really welcoming. This last year has demonstrated the need to also focus on the mechanical ventilation with good filters and very cleanable interior finishes and materials. So places that people can gather, can see and be seen, but also feel secure. Next, Gail. Wellness. Wellness, it's important. Wellness for residents is something we take very seriously. And integrating interiors and exteriors, designing to promote daylight and good air quality are some of the strategies we use. We use color. We want residents to feel warm and to feel comfortable on the spaces. And lastly, couple more, yeah. So now talking a little bit about landscape. We cannot talk enough. Something easy to observe is in consolidating communities is the need to extend the living space into the landscape or beyond your front door. The need for personalization. Everybody likes to put a Christmas decoration at their doors, and the Christmas decoration wants to be different from your neighbor, and you need the space for it. People love outdoors, and our short summer should be enjoyed. A design that promotes full integration between building and landscape is a very successful design. Next, Gail. Front porches connected to front yards, separation between units, and front doors are some examples and strategies that can be used to give residents the chance to personalize their entrance. Also space for planting. Some people love gardening. I know some people don't care, but some people really love and they really are proud of their flowers. So why not use these spaces to have these activities and to show others your talent. So I hope you are enjoying so far, and I would like to ask Gail to talk a little bit about sustainability.
Thanks, Annalise. And it all ties together. It's all circular. So one of the things that we think is really, really critical at this moment is that every design demands that focuses on both sustainability and climate resilience, and it needs to be integrated into every aspect of the site and building design. So this is a diagram. It's of that Lawrence Road project, just to show you. I mentioned it before. Here's how we do an analysis to see if we are designing for passive solar. In this case, the long walls of the buildings are all designed, which means the road is angled, to allow those long walls to face within 15 degrees of south, because that's how we maximize solar electric panels, right? Photovoltaics, otherwise known as PVs in my business. And the roof lines have to be designed to be predominantly south and west facing in order to maximize those solar electric panels so that we have an opportunity for renewable energy. Roof lines are kept simple so that it doesn't interfere with the photovoltaic array. So this is a way of thinking about sustainability from the very beginning, how we orient the building, how we do the massing. And then we go beyond that. So there's a variety of sustainable strategies that you should be looking for. Definitely low energy design. That means the building envelope, right? So our walls, roof, windows, doors. But it also means systems, lights, appliances. We want to, and I don't know how familiar people are with this term, decarbonize. We need to reduce the amount of carbon used in the building. So we want to make sure that we're using structure and materials that have the least embodied carbon. So they are spending, is the way I like to think about it, spending the least carbon necessary to do their job. We need to conserve water with water-saving fixtures, use rainwater for irrigation. And we need healthy homes. It's a critical piece of a community. So as Annalise mentioned, well ventilated, tempered, with tenant control, only healthy interior materials. And climate resilience needs to be baked into, as Sharon had pointed out, where you choose to build, but then also how we choose to build, how we site the buildings, how we develop a landscape that can absorb, for instance, a big flooding water event and let the water then recharge the aquifer. And then how do we do that low energy design? And Annalise mentioned passive house, and people may or may not be familiar with this term. I'll just say passive house means a super energy efficient, airtight, that's the key, airtight building envelope. Roughly, we think it adds about 2% to the cost of construction. So I'm going to acknowledge that right off. And this slide is meant to show how you get there. Step one, it's the architecture, how we insulate the building, make it airtight, etc. We can meet IECC is the International Energy Code. We can meet the energy code based on good architectural design. But to drive the energy use down, then we have to have really good systems, energy efficient lighting, energy efficient heating and ventilation and air conditioning. We have to manage the plug loads, maybe geothermal or something else as a source. That can get us down to this next line, right? The turquoise, bottom of the turquoise, passive house. And I'll reference here on the right-hand side, this graphic is talking about EUI. This is a term that if you haven't heard, you will begin to hear a lot more of. It is the energy use intensity. Regardless of your source of energy, there's a way to calculate it all together. So whether electric, propane, whatever, energy use intensity. And the goal here for using less, putting less carbon into our environment is the lowest possible energy use intensity in every building. So what we're always trying to do is drive to this bottom line, net zero energy. That means over the course of a year, the building or the development uses no more energy than it is able to generate on its own with renewable energies. So step three, the renewable energy. And that can get us down to net zero, or even better, to energy positive buildings. And we are able to get there. So Lawrence Road, as an example, the townhouses, the clustered townhouses need the renewable energy to get to this top of the green line here. And with solar panels, they may not get to net zero, but they're going to get pretty close. The elevator building, as Annalise mentioned, is just automatically easier to do this. And so the elevator building is going to probably get to net zero, and perhaps we can do better than that and actually generate more power on that roof than that building uses. So that's really the goal you want to be thinking about as we move forward, because this housing needs to last for the next 50 to 100 years, right? So then I want to touch on something related to health and wellness, and that's what we call biophilia. And I sustainable design encompasses health and wellness. Biophilia takes it a little bit of a step beyond. And there's a Cape connection here, Lower Cape connection. The term biophilia actually was coined by E.O. Wilson, longtime Wellfleet resident. And besides that, scientist and ecologist. So what he talked about was humans' innate tendency to seek connections with nature. And I think everybody who lives on the Lower Cape has a desire to seek connections with nature. So why is this important to talk about in architecture and in a presentation about designing for community? Because there are a lot of studies that have been done that show that biophilic design is going to reduce stress, actually reduce crime, expedite healing, and improve our cognitive function, creativity, and well-being. So this is my 1-minute intro to the topic. And basically the whole thing about it, there's lots to say about it, but I'm going to summarize it very quickly. It's about incorporating natural elements, organic forms and patterns, materials that reference nature, right? Why do we all love the warm look of natural wood? This is a reference to nature. It's design that integrates the building and landscape, as Annalise and I have been talking about, prioritizes daylight coming in and views of nature from the building out. It's important, several other points we've talked about are part of biophilia, having both order and variety, clarity of where you are, variety in colors and finishes and textures, and fostering individual choices, daylight, natural colors and finishes. These are all elements of biophilia, but frankly, I'd say they're all simply elements of good design. And that's, I'm going to leave it there, and a little reminder for all of us, it's really all about the people who are going to inhabit the buildings that we are going to develop. And we're happy to take questions.
Thank you so much, Gail and Annalise. That was a wonderful presentation. Folks who would like to ask questions, please raise your hand in the reactions. I don't see anything in the chat. This is usually a very, there we go, Carolyn. You can unmute yourself.
Hi, I'm John Sargent. Am I unmuted and can I talk?
John, if you could just a minute, Carolyn McPherson had her hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
That's okay.
Just one question, if Gail or Annalise could speak to a little bit about design that is specifically targeted for seniors and being able to age in place. If there are any particular elements that you think we should be cognizant of, since in Eastham particularly, I would assume that any housing that we do will have a strong component of seniors, since 35% of our population is over 65.
Right, and I mean, that's pretty much the case of the Lower Cape in general, right? Is an older population.
Well, we have the designation, I think, of being the oldest population on the Cape. So,
wow.
Yeah.
And if I remember correctly, I heard that Barnstable County has the oldest population in the country. I'm not sure if that's true, but I've heard that. So it's critical, right? I mean, affordable housing has to, and I think this is one of the things that's interesting about thinking about the affordable housing on the Lower Cape, is you have to think both about the importance of taking care of seniors and the importance of supporting young families who are having a hard time finding permanent housing on the Cape, right? So this is quite a range of needs. And I think it's really exciting, because then it means that you can create communities that I think are much more natural communities potentially, right? That really encompass the full age range, which many of us would prefer to live in, a place that has people of all ages and not just, segregated by age. So I think that's one of the things to think about first. Laura can probably address this better than I, but I am aware, having done affordable housing my whole career, that oftentimes the funding systems have separated the senior housing from the family housing. To me, this is really a mistake, because you really want to build communities, right? That's what this conversation is about. And communities should be infancy through the oldest of ages, right? But specifically to your question, Carolyn, about seniors, one of the reasons, besides the issue of preserving land, one of the reasons that we did the elevator building on Lawrence Road is that we think an elevator building is a better way to serve seniors, because under a single roof, they can have all of their amenity space. They can get together with other people in the neighborhood, say an inclement day, you don't want to go out. You have the ability to socialize in a commons space that's just on the first floor. If it's going to be group, shared laundry facilities, you can go to the laundry room without having to put your jacket on in the wintertime. So having all of your support services and the property manager, and potentially in a larger development, somebody who's actually connecting people to services that they need from outside. All of that can be under a single roof. And so there's some great advantage for senior housing to putting it into an elevator building, to say nothing of the fundamental thing of accessibility, right? 100% accessible at every space, because regardless of anybody's mobility impairments, they can get around to every space, and that's critical. So those are all arguments in favor of elevator buildings. It's not that we can't do senior housing that's in a lower scale building, but I think it's easier to serve people aging in place if we put it into an elevator building. And I think fundamentally the thing we have to think about is not the people who enter senior housing, say at 55 or 60. You really have to think about the people who've been there for 35 years.
Right, who want to age in place.
Correct.
We all want to age in our own homes, right? We don't want to be forced to move. So we need to make sure that we have thought through, both design-wise and program-wise, how we're going to provide the services that people might need as they age in place, whether that's delivered meals, whether that's healthcare coming into the building, right? To start to think about these things. And if it's not coming into the building, then how can you easily get to where that thing is? And
Thank
so where you put it matters too. Sorry,
Thank you.
that's a long answer.
No, it's a good, and I like particularly the emphasis on, as if you have an elevator building with a little bit of substance to it, it allows seniors to develop socialization within the building,
Correct.
which is very, very critical to wellness and long-term happiness.
Thank
Right,
you.
absolutely.
Move on to John. I think you're waiting. You still there, John?
There we are.
There you go.
It seemed to me that the projects that you were showing were all of the pretty much the same cost, or maybe the cost rental thing. I'm involved with the Governor Prince project, and one of the things we're looking at, and I don't know what all the different things are between workforce housing and low-income housing. Can you integrate both of those together in a way that you don't build this nicer one, will that keep others from wanting to? I guess what I'm saying, does somebody want to pay more for a house if there isn't as nice a house next to it? Can you integrate these in a nice way?
I think you can, John.
And this sounds snotty. I don't mean it to sound that way.
No, I get what you're saying. So I think for most of us involved in affordable housing, one of the principles is that all the housing needs to be the same. So in other words, if you're paying at, say, 120% of area median income, or 150%, I forget quite where the workforce numbers are, but if you're paying that, or if you're paying 30% of your income, I would argue that the housing needs to be just as nice regardless, right? So.
And you can do that then.
And we can do that,
Okay.
absolutely. And in fact, some of the funding would require you to do that. So
Yeah.
that is the right
Mhm.
principle. So the answer is that the development as a whole absorbs the expense, and then the income, the rent is set by what somebody's ability to pay is, right? But it's the ability to pay is not establishing the cost of construction, because the reality is, and this is probably good to say, Laura and I were talking about this yesterday, affordable housing is the single most expensive kind of housing you
Yep.
can build.
Yep. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, John. Ward, I see your hand up. You want to unmute yourself, please?
There we go.
There you go.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, Ward.
I wondered if you could talk some about the community response to proposals that incorporate your principles. In particular, something like, how do you promote the recognition of a cost trade-off to the values that you're outsetting? And how do you counter a response that, oh, this is going to be out of character with our community?
Great question. So to the first one, I have never had any issue with the values piece, never any counter to what we put out. I think, yes, on the, I'll call it the style question, right? Like the Cape Cod vernacular. So certainly in the discussion of our proposal for 95 Lawrence Road in Wellfleet, there were people who said, I don't like this design, it's too modern, or they said, we don't want an elevator building. There were certainly those voices. And to me, all design, not just affordable design, all design involves trade-offs. So I'm glad you used the term, because there are always trade-offs to be made in every set of decisions, right? Cost is one factor, and value is a different factor. And we have to decide what value we're looking for and what cost we can afford. And then we have to figure out how to work back and forth between those. So for instance, I'd give as an example for people who wanted a more spread out village approach to the Lawrence Road site, what they needed to understand is the more you spread that development out and cross topography, for instance, the more expense you're adding to the project. And the tighter and denser you can make that development, the less money you're spending on site infrastructure, and therefore the more money you have available to make really nice houses. These are trade-offs. And so to me, the design process involves that conversation, that if we can educate people about what those trade-offs look like, most people want to do the right thing. That's my experience.
I hope that's true most of the time. I do think that there is a kind of sometimes tendency to throw up objections that come out of a deeper seated uneasiness or worry. And if we only talk about the objection, we're not really addressing the deeper seated concern.
Exactly. So sometimes you have to go straight to that and put the pin in the bubble, right?
In a nice way.
In a very nice way, exactly. I think you know how to do it. You just said so.
Thank you. Thanks for your answer. I love the work.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gil. Jay, you're up next.
Thanks very much, Gail and Annalise and Sharon. Just a great presentation and overview. And I just wanted to follow up quickly on Ward's comment and then have another thing to bring up. I think that this idea of the third story building, that Gail really hit it on the head, that it's the trade-offs and the efficiency, the energy efficiency that's being achieved, as well as all of the great ways that we can support seniors in an elevator building, are why you want that a third story building is not a horrible thing. And I think, as Gail has shown us, that it can be designed and built in a way that's really sensitive. And so, for example, on Lawrence Road, we were very strategic about siting that building across the street from the elementary school, which is of a similar height. We also, in our presentation to the review committee in Wellfleet, went around town and took pictures of three-story buildings, including the Wellfleet Historical Society on Main Street. And I think that is one of the real key strategies here, is you need to show the community about how a three-story building is not that unusual here on the Cape. We see them, they already exist, and we don't notice them because they're well built and well designed, and aren't the kind of three-story rectangle apartment building that everybody's so terrified that we're building when we're talking about three-story buildings. The comment I wanted to make was just really the importance of all of the work that all of you who are here today can do to influence the kind of design that you're going to receive when RFPs go out. I actually have a really unique experience that my office looks out at a project in Eastham, and my condo that I live in Provincetown looks out at another affordable housing development in Provincetown. And every day I am reminded of two very different approaches to design. And from kind of my observations and views, and I think the list of things that Gail talked about, that they're really great examples of how you could really come up short, and how you can knock it out of the park and really create a neighborhood that people don't even, when people come to visit me, they have no idea actually that all of the buildings surrounding my condo are affordable housing. I have just absolutely no idea. The committee in the Lawrence Road Task Force in Wellfleet spent a lot of time. They did a lot of work with Laura, but they were very thoughtful. And one of the things they did is they went around and visited various projects and really asked themselves, like, what is it that we want? And how can we put together an RFP that's going to inspire and attract a design that's going to be acceptable to our community? And so I think that is really where a lot of time and energy needs to be placed. And putting in the RFP, like having wanting a priority for an energy efficient design is really important. That you can put in criteria that let developers know of what's important to you, and it will inspire that kind of design, so that we end up with more projects that look like Stable Path in Provincetown, or what we proposed for Lawrence Road in Wellfleet.
Thanks, Jay. I may come back to you with a question, but we'll get through the others first, okay? Paul, you have your hand raised.
Hi, yes. I was really interested in the part of the presentation on private entrances and the little private, garden areas outside them, and how much they contribute to the sort of unique home feeling of a place. And we were talking about trade-offs. I'm curious, to get that kind of feature, are you having to trade away? I mean, obviously every project's different, but speaking in generalities, are you having to trade away density to get that, or is it just a matter of cost to get that design feature?
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Paul, for the for your question. But so the way we did in Wellesley, and the way usually we do, we like to integrate into the massing. We like the articulation of the massing, the articulation of the design, establish these little spaces for us. So very often they are not an add-on, but they are integral part of the design. So that way they are way more cost efficient and more aesthetically pleasant to see. So you see so many, and we visit so many established communities out there, and you see the need that people have on making these spaces unique and really to find their front door, really to point and say, I belong to that space, that's my space, right? People are unique, and they really want unique places, unique houses. So that's our way to contribute to that.
And it doesn't really have to cost more. And I would also add, although we didn't show you an example, we have designed one in the city. Even in an elevator building, we can choose to have the first floor units have their front door on the ground. They can have an entry porch, just like an entry porch in a townhouse, right into their flat in an elevator building. And that's another way to create that sense of individual identity. And then we didn't get into the interiors that much, but we feel so strongly about this that in the elevator buildings, we'll still create some distinct entry area at every apartment, again, so that people can personalize that. And that's important.
It is important.
Did that answer you, Paul?
Yeah, I guess it did. I just was wondering what has to be traded away. It seems like a really obvious advantage as far as people's attachment to the place and their experience of living in the place. I think you can walk through Stable Path or a number of other developments and see how attractive they are to live in. I just was wondering, other than starting at the beginning of the process, if there are things you trade away to get that feature.
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, the thing I'd say is not, if we're really going to maximize density, and I will come back to this, if we're really going to maximize density, and land on the Lower Cape is precious, and we all have to remind ourselves of that, right? There will never be more of it than there is today. And the fact is that climate change tells us there will be less of it in the future. So land is a finite resource, and therefore it has to be treated as a treasure. That means you have to use every square inch of land the best you can. That argues for the elevator building, right? It argues for vertical construction. So if there's any trade-off, the trade-off is, when we go to the elevator building, not every unit is going to have that front door. But I would say to you, I am absolutely confident that architects know how to do a good job of designing an elevator building so that their same sense of individual identity comes forward at their unit on, down a hallway. We can do that. We know how to do that. So I don't think you have to trade that off.
Thank you.
Muted? Not muted. Thank you. Thank you both, Annalise and Gail, for that answer. There is a question in the chat regarding density. Sorry, I lost it. The response I received from town administration in Eastham regarding density is that the land can't handle additional septic needs for, say, 100 units on tea time. I realize this session is about design, but this problem seems to stalk the talk in its infancy. Anyone want to take that, or you want me to take it?
I was looking at Sharon.
Well, I mean, that's it's definitely a real issue. And, part of it is, I mean, there are ways to provide additional density through advanced wastewater treatment that's on site. That is one option. And the other is that the towns are moving forward to address their wastewater needs and sewering for nitrogen that are affecting the marine embayments, and that will also allow additional density for projects in certain locations. So it kind of all depends. You know, it's not every location or site is going to be suitable for additional density because of the wastewater issues on Cape. And you know, that's just something we're going to have to live with. But it is changing. The landscape is changing, and towns are addressing these issues.
Right, and there are pocket wastewater treatment plants that can accommodate more than 90 bedrooms. And
Yes.
Joe, you want to talk about Lawrence Road in that aspect?
Yeah, so this is definitely an issue in Wellfleet, and it has been, you know, the officials in Wellfleet kind of looking at what was happening with the 40B application in Truro for the Cloverleaf project and concerns about water quality and wastewater treatment. Decided to put together a proposal for town meeting to do a joint wastewater treatment plant that would serve the elementary school, and the police and fire facilities, which are all within in the neighborhood. And so we are working, looking at a number of different sources of funds to pay for that program, of that treatment program. But because you're expanding it, it's going to reduce the overall cost to the affordable housing development. And you know, and particularly like right now with the combinations of the Cape Islands Water Protection Fund, as well as the infrastructure bill, the federal infrastructure bill, there are resources available to pay for advanced treatment that will allow us to increase density at sites. And the Tea Time site, particularly given its proximity to public transportation, is a really good site where you would want to have 100 units, as Bonnie has outlined.
Yeah, and that definitely, just to piggyback on that, that definitely is something to consider and look at for these sites. Is, are there other uses, you know, particularly municipal uses that could either be tied into, or the development could be tied into, to both reduce nitrogen and potentially reduce marine embayment impacts as well. That's definitely an approach that's endorsed by the Cape Cod Commission in their regulatory review.
And I'll just add a plug for the Lawrence Road Task Force and their comprehensive review and putting the RFP together. It was late in the process where it was recognized that the project would, you know, could have a negative effect on embayments, and so they, you know, stopped and did the studies necessary to then work with the town to make this a joint proposal. So, you know, kudos to them for not just, you know, putting it aside and plowing forward. Carolyn, you have your hand up again?
Well, and to sort of piggyback on what this conversation is, not to make it specific about Eastham, but you know, originally the committee was looking at just the Tea Time property, but then the town bought the town center property, and which it expands the footprint significantly, which, as Jay said, happened in Truro. Looking at combining septic solutions for a larger area it makes it per unit cost for septic come down. And I think that's something that's started to happen in Eastham. I don't know enough about Orleans and the various projects going on in Orleans, but that may be something, you know, that they can look at as well.
Thanks.
And I'd say this is, interestingly, where some people in your towns may be worried about the size of an affordable housing project, that the larger scale may be really beneficial in allowing you to do, for instance, the innovative wastewater treatment and get MassWorks funding for it, which is the Lawrence Road plan. So sometimes thinking about the bigger project allows a bigger solution that there's actually support for outside of the town. And that certainly makes it much more affordable for the town.
Thanks. I'm going to turn it over to Andrea to wrap up. And are you there, Andrea?
Yeah, I'm right here.
Okay. I
Thanks,
lost you.
Laura. So I'm gonna wrap us up really quickly for people who need to leave now at 11:30, but we will be staying behind to answer any lingering questions, so feel free to stay. But I just wanted to say thank you so much to Laura and Gail and Annalise and Sharon for your presentations, and to all of you for your thoughtful questions. It's really lovely to see this level of conversation in our workshops. So just some things that I'm hearing when we're thinking about building housing for people at all income levels. There's a lot of different problems that we're trying to solve for, whether it's building multi-generational communities, building for climate change, increasing the economic feasibility of the development so that we can have on-site property management, supporting accessibility for seniors and people with different abilities, reducing sprawl, protecting open space, right? Maintaining the beauty of the region. All of these things point to increasing density. There's just really no way of doing all of these things without increasing density, particularly building up rather than out. And so I hope that this session has given you some language to use as we're having these conversations throughout the region. And I also wanted to let you know that we have some really exciting programming coming up. So in March, our next workshop as part of the Lower Cape Housing Institute, we'll be talking about the history of land use policy on Cape Cod, which I think will set us up for a really interesting conversation over the next year around considerations around zoning so that we can get the type of housing that we want. And then we'll have our spring peer group meetings, our Lower and Outer Cape peer group meetings in April, where we're hoping to extend the conversation around zoning, as well as have our town updates like we always do. And so the YouTube link will be sent out. You can view the recordings, and you can always email us questions and we can pass them on to the speakers. Thank you so much if you need to leave, but feel free to stick around if you have any other questions.
Thanks, Andrea. Any more questions? There's a couple in the chat, but I think they all got answered.
Yes, I think there was a question about the MassDOT floodplain work. I'm looking it up now. I think it is coming out soon. I don't think it's really quite available to all towns. I wasn't able to access it for the Lower Cape yet, but I think it should be coming out very soon. But I can share some materials on that you could share with the group.
Thanks, Sharon. Any other questions? Alan? Good morning.
Good morning. Haven't seen you in a long time.
Yeah.
I just wanted to sort of follow up on this whole issue about density and infrastructure and so forth. And Orleans was mentioned early on, and I think George was on here, but I don't see him right now. And Sharon started off as a planner, and I'm a planner. And we're trained to think ahead. And in the case of Orleans, they put together their local comprehensive plan under the Cape Cod Commission Act in the late in 1999, basically. I think it was originally put together, and it talked about what could happen in downtown Orleans and proposed zoning changes which have been implemented over time. And I just want to note that as we have done that, and as we have designed the downtown sewer collection system, which is now under construction, $58 million. A year from now, if you come into Orleans, you'll flush into a system, not into the ground. But as part of the planning for that, we looked very carefully at what our master plan said. We looked very carefully at some work that had done by the Cape Cod Commission, looking at downtown in a variety of ways. And we designed that system to accommodate some retail expansion and between 500 and 700 additional dwelling units. So as these projects have come along, Cape Cod 5 is one, 62 units. Wastewater is not an issue. It's taken care of. And as Governor Prince is looking at various alternatives, we've already designed the system at Governor Prince to accommodate what the zoning would allow for housing. So I only speak as an old gray-haired planner, think ahead, because it takes time and you want to really think about where you want to end up. And I just want to also note that as we went through a fairly sensitive neighborhood affordable housing project at 107 Main Street, before we ever sent out the RFP, the Housing Trust and the Housing Committee had 3 neighborhood meetings where we tried to assemble all the issues that the neighbors had. And we verified them. We went back to them and said, double check, is this what you said? And then as the trust and the committee put together the RFP with the planning department, every one of those issues that had been raised in that process was addressed in the RFP, and we alerted the potential respondents, these are the issues that you have to deal with. So I think it's important. RFP development is difficult, but when you do it, spend the time before you ever draft it, thinking about the issues at the site, because hopefully that will reduce the complaints you're going to get anyways, but at least you're one step ahead. Thank you.
Thanks, Alan. I'll just do a plug for myself and MHP is that we do RFP development, pre-development to get the site ready information-wise for developers, and then to put RFPs together, working with whatever group is doing it, and we do it at no cost to the towns. And I think that unless I see anyone else's hand raised, Gail, I can't thank you enough. It was a wonderful program. Sharon, same, great setting of the table for planning.
Laura, I think Debbie has a question.
Oh,
I do. I'm sorry. I seem to have lost my raise hand. I can't find it anywhere on this screen.
okay.
So,
It's in reactions, but go ahead.
oh, thank you for future reference when it disappears. I just wanted to make one comment bring relative to the whole design issue and how, to me, that it's just such a crucial piece of what we're trying to do here. And I want to say it was a wonderful presentation. And apropos of what Jay was talking about, all the different, there are some less successful examples that we should all look at. But I also just wanted to raise the point, because I'm on the Architectural Review Committee in Orleans, as well as the Governor Prince Planning Committee. And I hear all the time people look around at what they see today and they see one thing and they don't want to see anything different. And I just want to say that Orleans has historically had all kinds of architecture, and this whole idea of the Cape Cod, simple New England house is not the only thing that developed organically. It's throughout the Cape, but I'm going to focus on Orleans. There's also the very large farmhouses, very large barns that were attached to those farmhouses that give us forms to work with. There were also, the sea captain's mansions. If you look at the history of the Cape and its relationship to the rest of the world, it was related to the rest of the world. A lot of art came back through the sea captains, and then they came and built large, interesting houses that, we still have. And those are part of the vernacular as well. And even more recently, I just wanted to point out, if you look at the Edward Hopper portrait of Orleans, what you'll see, there's row houses. There, it's a series of row houses with steps up, 2 stories above ground, potentially 1 story below. It's not that much detail, but it could be there. So I think we have a wide range of forms that actually do relate to the history of our towns. We don't have to look all the same. What's happening a lot is we get the big white rectangle box with some dormers attached to it and call it a day. And it's really so uninteresting, and I would say soul sucking, that we do not want that, in my opinion, in our future development. As you say, whatever we build now is going to be here for hopefully 100 years. We should be able to be proud of it. Thank you.
Thanks, Debbie. That was.
Debbie, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I feel like the only thing that is completely out of place on the Cape is that big box that's trying to look like a little Cape house, right? Because a Cape vernacular house was what, 800, maybe 1,200 square feet.
Right.
You can't do that form and increase it by 100-fold and expect it to have charm,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
There's no charm left. You're right, soul sucking is exactly.
Yeah, Debbie, thank you. Debbie,
Couldn't agree
Debbie,
more.
thank you so much for your considerations and for your points, because that's music for our ears. You know, designing Lawrence Road, we
I
had to
love that.
research. We had to research a lot, and we did, and we saw exactly what you mentioned. You know, a variety of things, a variety. So our job was also to remind people that this typology already exists. It's not new, right? We are just using in a different way, in a modern way. So thank you for that.
Okay. All right. Sharon, I think I stopped in the middle of thanking you for setting the table for us in planning and the considerations that we all need to take care to listen to in planning on the Lower Cape and on the Cape, really anywhere. But you know, definitely great reminders and pointers for step 1 is look around you first.
Yeah, that's really good. Yeah. Good elevator speech. Speaking of elevators, right?
Yes, yes. And Gail and Annalise, thank you again for everything. And Andrea for hosting, and Pelinda for
Yes.
the backroom things. Thank you all, and we'll see you in March.
Thank you,
Keep
everybody.
me
Have a great
posted.
day.
I'd like to join that. I'd like to attend. So thanks.
Great. I'll
Okay.
send you a link.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks all.
Thanks.